One day, when I was an elementary schooler, I think about 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the morning, this meant that I too overslept, and now there was just no way I was going to be ready for school early enough to get on the school bus. School started at 8 a.m. and my bus picks me up around 7, but it was already like 6:40 or something, and I was still in my pajamas and hadn't even had breakfast yet. So Mom decided that today we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school instead, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there at the dining room table eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and now about 6:50. We hear the bus pull up about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus doesn't pull away. There's a knock at the door, and Mom opens it to find a man in a bus driver uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular driver called in sick. He says he knows he's a few minutes early since he wanted to get an early start on the route since he didn't know it that well. Mom explains to him that she was going to take me to school since we both woke up late. He visibly gets upset and says that he can wait a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists that no, I won't be ready in a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. He seemed angry about this, but turned around and got back in the bus and left. I returned to eating my breakfast and don't have my school clothes on at this point, but at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mom thinks this is weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside looking terrified, but doesn't really say anything about it and tells me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but Mom would end up telling me a few years later. When my mom went to the second school bus, she found that it was being driven by my regular bus driver, and it was full of the other kids that were usually on the route. The other bus was empty, by the way. Mom asks the bus driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. I never called in sick, he said. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go inside and call the police, which she did without me knowing, and report this incident. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard about it again, not even if someone else ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would have never made it to school or back home. And if my mom hadn't overslept on that specific day, I would have been on that bus. I worked a fairly entry-level job in a mixed commercial industrial area in my community. Because of the nature of most of the work in the area, mostly manufacturing and construction type jobs, it wasn't uncommon to see people walking around with canvas pants covered in oil and being a little dingy looking. I carpooled with my mom since she worked nearby, and that particular day, my mom had called me to tell me that she was going to be about a half hour late picking me up. Instead of waiting for her, I decided that I would walk to a nearby coffee shop and wait for her there. It was late in the afternoon, 4 p.m. or so very quiet. I was the only customer in the shop when I sat down at a table to read a newspaper. A few minutes after I sat down, a very handsome middle-aged guy walked in a few minutes behind me. He was very attractive and had a very comfortable charm to him, but it really struck me how clean he looked for the area, especially wearing coveralls and work boots. Didn't think too much of it at first, honestly, so when he asked if he could sit next to me and chat while he waited for his own drive, I said okay. We actually had a nice conversation for a little while, until he started asking personal questions about me. I just kept talking, even though I started getting a really strange vibe. I started to get very uncomfortable when I asked him what he did for a living. He told me he worked at a nearby manufacturing plant, and that he'd been working there for about a year. He then told me it was his first job he'd ever had, so he was really excited about his career starting there. Remember, this guy's middle-aged. Not only what he said, but how he said it just struck me as strange. This became my first bold and waving red flag to get the fuck out. Instantly, I had a moment where I was like, what middle-aged man is only 1 year into his first job? Especially in an area that can't really be shrugged off as prolonged education, rich parents, etc. To me, that screamed recent prison release. On top of that, for him to be so clean despite him saying where he works. I immediately start texting my mom under the table and said that I was really uncomfortable and she needed to come ASAP. I continued talking to him like nothing was weird, but deep down I was really regretting telling him anything about myself in case he followed me. So when my mom pulled into the parking lot, I quickly got out of there and hopped in the car. As she pulled out of the parking lot, I see him leave the coffee shop and hop into his own car. Now remember, in our conversation, he had told me he was waiting for a ride. If I had been paying attention to him as he came in, I would have realized that it was a lie and he drove there himself and would have avoided the whole situation. Obviously, I'm freaking out. I explained to my mom what was going on and she sped down the street. Looking behind us, who's there? Obviously, the guy in his car tailing us. My mom purposely ducked and dove down all sorts of bizarre streets and went in circle after circle. He followed us for close to 30 minutes before giving up. I don't know why I didn't report my experience to the police. I was just so shocked that something like that would happen. I went on with my life and shook it off as if nothing happened. Fast forward about a week and my mom picks up a newspaper only to find out that on the front page there is a picture of this one and same very handsome man. He had kidnapped a woman and shoved her into her own trunk, drove her while she was still in the trunk about 200 miles to another city, forced her to take all of her money out of her bank account, and then abandoned her there with no wallet or vehicle. If it wasn't for my mom, I could have been so screwed that day. Fortunately, the woman wasn't physically injured or sexually assaulted, but I cannot imagine spending hours in the trunk of your own car not knowing where someone was taking you. It's been about 7 years since this happened, and I still have some serious trust issues with strangers. I didn't work in that area much longer. It became too difficult for me. For reference, this happened when I was 12 in the late 90s. I'm a girl, and though I've since grown about 4 inches, I was about 5'2" at the time, and probably barely 100 pounds. I've always been very athletic, playing multiple sports from the time I was even mildly conscious, because I've had a good number of high-level athletes in my family, including my dad. My mom is from a major city and taught me the value of awareness of my surroundings early on. All of this will make sense in a moment. She always told me to have my keys to our house out and in my hand as soon as I got off the school bus to walk down my street, though I never knew why she wanted me to do this. I am so glad she always stressed this, because I'm pretty certain it saved my life. So one day, I say bye to my friends and hop off the school bus to take the short walk down to my house. My street curves in a half circle, which makes it difficult to see around the curve. So basically you can only see a little bit in front and behind you as you walk. It's the least creepy street ever. Neighbors all around with a comfortable distance between houses. As I'm walking around my curving street, I get a funny feeling that makes me turn around and look behind me as the crossing street is going out of my view. I see a man walking down the street that mine makes a T-shape with, the one I was dropped off on. Weird, I think, as I've never seen him before. And not to say we know everyone, but what struck me as weird was what he was wearing. It wasn't how people dressed around here. He was dressed in fine jeans and a polo, both of which were way too big on him. I shrugged and kept walking, but something was really bothering me about this guy. I was about to walk by my next door neighbor's house, still pondering what made me feel so scared, when I looked back again. I figured I'd have to walk out into the street a bit closer to see where he went, but no. I'd walked a fair distance, but this guy was no more than 10 feet from me. You always think in situations like this that you'd scream or something, but my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't fathom how he'd gotten so close that fast, and his wide-eyed, hyper-focused stare threw daggers into my stomach. I knew I was in big trouble. Not wanting to find out what the fuck he wanted, who he was, or why he was gaining on me, I went directly into flight mode, knowing my house was about 100 yards away. I took off running across my driveway and realized he was running after me because I heard his feet on the asphalt and then on my driveway. I knew he was close because I ran track, but I didn't waste time looking back. Realizing my backpack, which probably weighed half of what I did, was slowing me down, I threw my arms back, holding my keys in a death grip. I knew I could outrun him if I weren't so heavy and my backpack slipped off. I was able to gain distance on him, and I don't know if it was panic or adrenaline or whatever, but my front door keyhole became so huge in my eyesight, and I jammed my key in and got inside. I slammed my door so hard that it recoiled, and half thinking about what could happen if he got into my empty house, I slammed it closed and locked it. I stood there for a moment, just wide-eyed and confused, until I realized I should look out of the peephole. When I did, it was pitch black. More confusion. I stood there and started to shake uncontrollably, and that's when I saw why it was black. Light started coming through as I saw this fucking creep's eye, and then him backing away from my door, having tried to look in. He was that close to me. He stood there for a moment, eyeballing my door and house, probably looking for another way in. Then he turned around on my porch to face the street, cursing under his breath. He then raises the creep factor to new heights. He skip walks off my porch, across my giant lawn to the street in the same direction we had been running, and raises his hand in the air. From behind my very tall pine trees on the right side of my vantage point, I see a white windowless van pull up in front, and he hops in. I can't see the driver because of the tinted windows in front, but they sat there, and I swear I could feel them looking at my door, maybe figuring out what to do next. They drove off, and I slumped to the floor, shaking and freaking out so hard I legitimately had to crawl to my kitchen. I hid and called my mom, who, despite working all the way downtown in the city, made the 45-minute drive back home in 15. We called the cops, and I gave my statement, but they never found those freaks.